You know, after 40 years on this bench, I've learned to trust a feeling. It's a quiet thing. It sits in my chest before a case even begins. And on that particular morning, as I walked into my courtroom in Providence, I felt it. Something told me this day was going to test more than just the law. It was going to test my heart. But before I tell you this whole story, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share with you is something that needs to be heard. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single word of this. I've been a judge in Providence for over 40 years. Every morning I arrive at 8:15 sharp. I've been doing that since 1984. Some habits stick with you. I hang my robe the same way. I place my glasses in the same spot. And Christina, my clerk, brings me my coffee the same way she always has. Strong, black, no sugar. She knows I don't even have to ask. I usually take a few quiet minutes before court begins. I look over the day's docket. I listen to the faint sounds of the hallway filling up. Shoes on tile, low voices, the shuffle of papers. I say a short prayer under my breath. My father used to tell me, "Frank, when you sit in judgment of someone, remember you're judging someone's son or daughter." I've never forgotten that. My father immigrated from Italy with nothing but hope and a work ethic. He didn't have much, but he had respect. Respect for this country, respect for the flag, respect for anyone who served it. Growing up in Providence, I saw men come home from war. Some came home proud, some came home broken, but my father would always shake their hands the same way, firm, grateful. That morning, as I flipped through the case files, one name caught my attention. It wasn't the charge at first, it was the last name, a name I recognized. In Providence, you learn the names that carry weight. This one carried a lot of it, billionaire level weight. I leaned back in my chair and removed my glasses. I rubbed my eyes for a second. The charge was simple on paper: reckless driving, public disturbance, minor damage to property. I've seen thousands like it, but what stood out wasn't the charge. It was the note in the margin. Incident involved homeless veteran. I remember thinking to myself, this isn't going to be simple. Christina knocked softly and stepped into my chambers. I could smell the coffee before I saw it. She handed it to me and said, "Full house today, Judge." I nodded. I asked her quietly, "Is that young man here, the one with the Montgomery last name?" She gave me that look she gives when she already knows what I'm thinking. "Yes, Judge, and so is the veteran." I stood up from my chair and walked toward the small window that looks out over the hallway. I don't usually do that, but something told me to take a look. I saw a young man in a tailored suit, expensive, crisp, perfectly fitted. He was scrolling on his phone, barely looking up. Next to him stood an older man, thin, shoulders slightly hunched, wearing an old military jacket that had seen better days. I watched the difference between them without hearing a word. The young man stood like the world owed him space. The older man stood like he was trying not to take up too much of it. I felt something tighten in my chest. You need to understand something about me. I've presided over cases involving millionaires and men who had nothing but the clothes on their backs. And I've learned one thing in 40 years. The law doesn't care about your bank account. It cares about your actions. I walked back to my desk and opened the file again. The report said the incident happened outside a downtown café. The veteran had been sitting on a bench. The young man's car nearly clipped him while pulling up too fast. Words were exchanged. Witnesses reported laughter, mocking comments, a crowd gathering. I had to pause. Mocking comments. I've seen anger in my courtroom. I've seen fear. I've even seen hatred. But mockery has a different sting. It's colder. It cuts deeper. It tells someone they don't matter. At 9 hours sharp, I stepped onto the bench. The courtroom stood. I adjusted my robe and looked out at the room. I always take a moment before I speak. I look at faces. I read body language. I try to see beyond the paperwork. That's when I saw him clearly for the first time. The veteran. He held his cap in his hands. It was worn at the edges. His hair was gray, thin in places. His face carried lines that don't come from age alone. They come from years of carrying memories. His eyes were steady, though, not angry, not ashamed, just steady. Then I looked at the young man. He didn't look at me at first. He was whispering something to the attorney beside him. A small smile crossed his face. I've seen that smile before. It's the smile of someone who believes this is just a minor inconvenience. I cleared my throat and called the first case. But even as I handled the early matters, I could feel the tension building in the room. It's hard to explain. Sometimes the air feels heavier before a storm. This felt like that. When I finally reached their case, I said the name out loud. My voice echoed slightly against the courtroom walls. The young man stepped forward confidently. The veteran followed more slowly. I looked directly at the older man first. I said, "Sir, please state your name for the record." His voice was soft but clear. He told me his name. He added, almost as an afterthought, "United States Army, retired." I felt that in my bones. I nodded. I said, "Thank you for your service." I always say that, and I mean it every time. Then I turned my eyes to the young man. "And you, sir?" He gave his name. Same last name I had seen in the file. Same one tied to skyscrapers and headlines. As they both stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling that this case wasn't about a fender or a fine. It was about something deeper. It was about how we see each other. Let me ask you something. Have you ever witnessed someone treat another human being like they were invisible, like their story didn't matter? I want you to think about that for a second. And if you've ever felt that kind of sting, let me know in the comments. I read them, and I care about what you think. I looked back down at the report. My gut was telling me to pay attention. I had a feeling there was more to this story than a traffic violation. I leaned forward slightly on the bench. I folded my hands together, and I said, "All right, let's talk about what happened that morning." And that's when the day truly began. I leaned forward slightly and looked at the veteran first. I always start with the person who seems the quietest. I've learned over the years that the softest voice often carries the heaviest story. I said to him, "Sir, tell me in your own words what happened that morning." He cleared his throat. I watched his hands as he spoke. They were rough, not just from age, from life. He held his cap tightly, like it grounded him. He said, "Your Honor, I was sitting outside the café. I sit there most mornings. I don't bother anyone. I just sit." His voice trailed off for a second. I waited. Silence can be powerful in a courtroom. It gives people space to breathe. He continued, "A car pulled up fast, too fast. It jumped the curb a little. I had to move my legs out of the way. I said, 'Slow down, son.' That's all I said." I glanced at the young man. He was staring straight ahead, jaw tight now. The smirk from earlier had faded, but not entirely. The veteran went on. He got out of the car laughing, said something about how I should be grateful he didn't run me over because it would have been the most excitement I'd had all week. A few people in the gallery shifted in their seats. I felt my stomach tighten. I said gently, "And then what happened?" He looked down at his cap. "I told him I served this country so he could drive that car. I didn't mean it in a proud way, just a fact." He laughed again. I heard the word laugh, and something inside me hardened. He looked up at me then, and his eyes were steady. He said, and I remember it clear as day, "If you served so well, why are you homeless?" The courtroom went quiet, not just quiet. Still, I removed my glasses slowly and set them on the bench. I had to take a breath. In 40 years, I've heard a lot of cruel things, but some words don't just insult a person, they insult sacrifice. I said softly, "Did you respond to that?" He nodded once. I told him, "Not all wounds are visible, Your Honor." That line stayed with me. Not all wounds are visible. I felt the weight of those words settle into the room. I've met veterans who came home with medals and nightmares, Men who could survive combat but not the silence afterward. People don't always understand that. I turned to the young man. I said, "Sir, is that an accurate account?" He shifted his stance. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering something. I held up my hand gently. "I'd like to hear from him." He sighed, not loudly, but enough. He said, "Your Honor, this is being blown out of proportion. I didn't mean anything by it. It was just a joke." A joke. I leaned back in my chair and studied him carefully. I've seen this before, the belief that words don't carry weight, that humor excuses harm. I said, "Tell me exactly what you said." He hesitated, then he shrugged. I said if he was such a hero, maybe he should have fought harder for his own life here. I felt my pulse in my ears. It took everything in me not to raise my voice. I've always believed that power doesn't need volume, so I kept my tone steady. I said, "Do you understand what you're saying in this courtroom?" He looked confused, almost annoyed. I was just pointing out the obvious. If someone really had discipline and strength, they wouldn't end up on the street. The words hung in the air like smoke. I glanced at Christina. I saw her close her eyes for just a moment. She's seen thousands of cases with me. She knows when something crosses a line. I leaned forward again. "Let me tell you something I've learned after 40 years on this bench. Strength doesn't always look like success. Sometimes strength looks like survival." The veteran stood quietly beside him. He didn't interrupt. He didn't lash out. That, to me, spoke louder than anything. I asked the veteran, "Sir, may I ask how long you served?" He answered, 8 years active duty, 2 tours overseas." I nodded slowly. "And after you came home?" He swallowed. "I tried to adjust, worked construction for a while. Then the panic attack started. Loud noises, crowds. I couldn't keep steady work." I watched the young man's expression. For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. The veteran continued, "I lost my apartment after medical bills piled up. Didn't want to burden my daughter. She's raising kids of her own." He said that without self-pity, just fact. I had to pause. Growing up, my father would tell me about men who came home from war and were never the same. He would say, "Frank, respect isn't about how someone stands when they're strong. It's about how they stand when they're hurting." I looked at the veteran and saw dignity, not weakness. I turned back to the young man. "Did you know any of this?" He shook his head. "No, Your Honor, but that's not my responsibility." That sentence hit me harder than the others. Not my responsibility. I leaned back and folded my hands. "You're right," I said calmly. "It's not your responsibility to know his history, but it is your responsibility to show basic human decency." He didn't respond. I said, "You drive a car that costs more than most people make in a year. That's your right. You come from a wealthy family. That's your circumstance. But neither of those things gives you permission to mock someone who served this country." I could feel the room leaning in. "Let me ask you something. Have you ever seen someone confuse privilege with superiority? There's a difference. A big one. If you know what I mean, tell me in the comments. I want to know your thoughts." I looked back at the veteran. "Sir, did you file this complaint because you wanted money?" He shook his head quickly. "No, Your Honor. I don't want his money. I want him to understand." That broke something in me. He didn't want compensation. He wanted acknowledgement. I turned my eyes slowly to the young man again. I said, "He doesn't want your money. He wants your respect." The young man swallowed. His posture wasn't as confident now. His shoulders weren't as straight, but I wasn't done listening. I had a feeling there was still more beneath the surface. My gut was telling me to keep digging. After 40 years, I've learned to trust that instinct. I picked up the file again and noticed something I hadn't fully focused on before. A small note attached to the incident report. It mentioned that witnesses said the laughter continued even after the veteran identified himself as a former sergeant. I looked up slowly. I said, "Is that true? Did you continue laughing after you knew he had served?" The young man hesitated longer this time, and that hesitation told me more than any words could. I felt the temperature in the room shift, not physically, emotionally. This wasn't just about reckless driving anymore. This was about character, and I knew deep down that what happened next was going to define more than just a case number on my docket. I looked at him and waited. In my courtroom, silence isn't empty. It's pressure. It gives a person one last chance to choose honesty. He finally said, "Yes," I laughed, "but it wasn't that serious." Not that serious. I've heard those words before. They usually come right before someone realizes it was very serious. I leaned forward and rested my hands on the bench. I said, "Tell me something. What exactly did you find funny?" He shifted his weight. I could see a small crack forming in that confident shell. But pride is stubborn, especially at that age. He said, "It just felt dramatic, like he was trying to guilt me." I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice steady. "And what about serving your country feels dramatic to you?" He didn't answer right away. His lawyer leaned in again, whispering urgently. I raised my hand gently. "Let him speak." He looked at me and said, "With all due respect, Your Honor, I don't see how his past has anything to do with a parking incident." I sat back slowly. I removed my glasses and held them in my hand. I've done that thousands of times. It gives me a second to think. It also lets the person in front of me know I'm paying very close attention. I said, "It has everything to do with it." The courtroom was quiet. I could hear the faint hum of the air system. Even the smallest sound feels louder when tension fills a room. I continued, "Because the law isn't just about damage to property, it's about how we treat one another." He sighed again, that small sigh, the kind that says this is inconvenient. That's when I noticed something else. His father wasn't there. I scanned the courtroom briefly. No familiar billionaire face, no high-powered executive presence, just the young man and his attorney. I've raised children. I've been married for decades. I know what guidance looks like, and sometimes I know what its absence looks like too. I said to him, "How old are you?" 24. I nodded. At 24, I was working 2 jobs and helping my father pay bills, not because I had to, but because that's what family did. He didn't respond, but I saw his expression shift slightly, not defensive, just uncertain. I turned to the veteran again. "Sir, what was your rank?" "Sergeant." I looked at the young man. "Do you know what it means to be a sergeant?" He shrugged faintly. "Not really." I said, "It means men trusted him with their lives." That landed. I could see something flicker in his eyes now. It wasn't arrogance anymore. It was discomfort. But then he said something that made the entire room stiffen. He said, "With respect, Your Honor, if he was so trusted and disciplined, why didn't he build something better after the military? Plenty of veterans do." There it was, that line, the one he should never have crossed. I felt the air change. I felt my chest rise a little deeper as I inhaled. I had to pause. I've learned that when anger rises, silence is your best friend. I stood up from my bench. I rarely do that. But I did then. I looked directly at him and said very calmly, "Let me tell you something I've learned in 40 years. I walked a few steps along the bench, my hands resting lightly on the wood. War doesn't end when a soldier comes home. For some, it just changes location." The courtroom was so still I could hear someone shift in their seat 3 rows back. I continued, "You see a homeless man. I see someone who may wake up every night hearing sounds the rest of us never had to hear. You see failure. I see sacrifice." He didn't interrupt this time. I could see the veteran staring at the floor now, not ashamed, just tired. I felt something deep in my chest. I remembered a case from years ago. A young Marine who couldn't hold a job because fireworks sent him into panic. He told me once, "Your Honor, I survived the battlefield. I just can't survive the grocery store." Those words never left me. I looked back at the young man and said, "You asked why he didn't build something better. Let me ask you something. What have you built that didn't come from your last name?" The courtroom felt electric. His face flushed slightly. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I wasn't trying to humiliate him. That's not my role, but sometimes a mirror is necessary. He finally said quietly, "I've started a tech company." I nodded. "With whose funding?" He hesitated. "My father's." I held his gaze. "There's nothing wrong with opportunity, but don't confuse opportunity with superiority." I saw his shoulders drop just a little. "Let me ask you something. Have you ever seen someone inherit comfort and mistake it for accomplishment? It happens more than we admit. I want to know your thoughts, because this isn't just about one young man. It's about how we define worth." I turned back to the veteran. "Sir, when you told him about your service, what were you hoping he would understand?" The veteran took a deep breath. "That freedom isn't free, Your Honor." That simple sentence carried more weight than any argument in that room. I looked at the young man again. "Did you understand that in that moment?" He shook his head slowly, not defiantly, just honestly. "I didn't think about it," he said. "Exactly. That's the problem sometimes. Not hatred, not cruelty, just thoughtlessness. And thoughtlessness can wound deeply." I walked back behind my bench and sat down again. I folded my hands and leaned slightly forward. I said, "You laughed at a man who carried more weight at 20 than most carry in a lifetime." He looked down now. I noticed something else then. His hands. They weren't steady anymore. The confidence in his posture had softened, but I still felt there was more beneath this surface. Something about his tone earlier. Something about that reflex to dismiss. I glanced at the file once more. That's when I noticed a detail I hadn't fully processed. The veteran's full name. It struck something faint in my memory. I couldn't place it yet. But it stirred something. I looked at the veteran again. "Sergeant, which unit did you serve in?" He answered clearly, and when he said it, I felt something shift inside me, because that unit name, I'd heard it before, years ago, from someone else. I leaned back slowly. Time seemed to slow down just a little. I had a feeling this case wasn't finished revealing itself, not even close. When he said the name of that unit, I felt a chill move through me. It wasn't just a random detail. It wasn't just another line on a service record. I had heard that unit mentioned before, years ago, in a different context, from someone whose voice I still remember clearly. I leaned back in my chair and looked at him carefully. "Sergeant," I said, "what years did you serve in that unit?" He told me. My heart skipped a beat, because those were the same years a close friend of mine had served overseas, a man I grew up with, a man who came home different, a man who once sat in my kitchen and told me stories he said he'd never share with anyone else. I had to steady myself. I said quietly, "Did you happen to serve under a captain named Reynolds?" The veteran looked up quickly. His eyes widened just a little. "Yes, Your Honor, I did." The room felt smaller. Captain Reynolds. I hadn't said that name in years. I swallowed and said, "He was a friend of mine." The veteran's expression changed, not dramatic, just recognition. "He was a good man," the veteran said softly. I nodded. Yes, he was. For a second, the courtroom faded in my mind. I remembered sitting across from my friend years ago. He had told me about a night patrol gone wrong, an ambush, chaos, smoke, screaming. And he told me about a sergeant who ran back into gunfire to pull 2 wounded men to safety. I felt my pulse quicken. I leaned forward slightly. "Sergeant," I said carefully, "did something happen during your second tour, involving an ambush?" He went still. The young man beside him looked confused. His lawyer glanced between us, unsure where this was going. The veteran hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Honor, it did." I could feel every eye in that courtroom fixed on him. I said gently, "Tell me." He took a breath. "Our convoy was hit. Heavy fire. We lost 2 vehicles. Captain Reynolds was pinned down. I went back for him. His voice wasn't proud. It wasn't dramatic. It was matter of fact. I wasn't thinking. I just moved. I felt something tighten in my throat. He continued, "We got out, barely, but we lost 3 men that night." The silence in that courtroom felt sacred. I remembered my friend telling me, if it weren't for that sergeant, I wouldn't be here. He had never told me the sergeant's name, just that he owed his life to him. I looked at the man standing before me. I said softly, "Were you decorated for that?" He shrugged faintly. "Bronze Star, but that's not why you do it." "No, it's not." I felt my eyes sting just a little. I don't hide my emotions easily, but I don't let them control me either. I turned slowly to the young man. He was staring at the veteran now, really staring at him for the first time. I said, "The man you laughed at ran into gunfire to save others." The words echoed. I let them sit. Then the young man did something unexpected. He said quietly, "I didn't know." I looked at him carefully. "You didn't ask. That's different." He swallowed. "I just saw what he is now," he said. I nodded slowly. "That's the danger of surface judgments." I stood again. I needed to move. Sometimes when emotion fills a room, movement helps steady it. I stepped down from the bench and stood closer to both of them. Not aggressively, just present. I said, "You asked why he didn't build something better after the military. Let me explain something clearly." I looked directly at him. "Some battles don't end with a medal. Some follow you home. Some sit with you at night when the world is quiet." I turned slightly toward the gallery. I have seen strong men break under the weight of memories. I have seen decorated soldiers struggle to stand in grocery store lines because a loud sound sent them back years in their minds. I looked back at the veteran, and yet here he stands, calm, dignified. Then I looked back at the young man, and you laughed. The words weren't shouted, but they carried weight. He looked down at his shoes now. His earlier confidence was gone completely. I could see something happening inside him, something uncomfortable, something real. Let me ask you something. Have you ever judged someone by the chapter you walked into without knowing the whole book? We do it more than we admit, and sometimes we don't realize the damage until it's too late. I stepped back behind my bench slowly and sat down again. I said, "Sergeant, why didn't you mention any of this outside that café?" He answered without hesitation, "Because I don't lead with my past, Your Honor. I just wanted him to slow down." That humility struck me harder than any dramatic speech could have. I looked back at the young man and said, "You mocked a man who carries more courage in his worst day than most people show in a lifetime." He closed his eyes briefly. Then something shifted again. He said quietly, "My grandfather served." That caught my attention. I said, "Tell me about him." He hesitated. "He was in Vietnam. My dad doesn't talk about it much. He died before I was born." I nodded. "Did you ever learn what he went through?" He shook his head slowly. "Not really." I leaned forward. "And yet you felt comfortable dismissing another man's service." He didn't answer. The veteran glanced at him for the first time with something other than neutrality. It wasn't anger. It was sadness. I could feel the emotional current running through the room now, but I still had that unsettled feeling in my chest. There was something more here, something not yet said. I picked up the file again and flipped through a few additional pages. That's when I noticed a supplemental report attached from a witness. It mentioned that after the laughter and comments, the young man had taken out his phone and recorded part of the exchange. I looked up sharply. I said, "Did you record him?" The young man looked startled. "Yes, but I didn't post it." "Why did you record it?" I asked. He hesitated longer this time. "I thought it would be funny." The word hung there. Funny. I felt my hands press lightly against the bench. "Did you plan to share it?" He didn't answer immediately. And in that hesitation, I felt something important shift again, because this wasn't just about careless words anymore. It was about humiliation, public humiliation. I leaned forward slowly and said, "I want you to think very carefully before you answer my next question." The room felt charged. I could sense everyone waiting. "Were you going to post that video online?" And the way his eyes flickered told me the truth before he even opened his mouth. I watched his eyes before I heard his words. In 40 years on this bench, I've learned that the eyes answer first. He swallowed and said quietly, "I sent it to a few friends." The room felt colder. "Just a group chat," he added quickly. "I didn't post it publicly." I leaned back slowly. "How many people are in that group chat?" He hesitated. "About 20. 20. I looked at the veteran. He stood still, but I saw it. That small tightening around his mouth, not rage, not embarrassment, something deeper, the kind of hurt that doesn't shout. I said calmly, "Did you caption it?" His lawyer shifted in his seat. I raised my hand gently again. "Let him answer." He nodded once. "Yes." "What did you write?" He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. I wrote, "Hero of the sidewalk." The words sat in the air like a stain. I felt my chest rise slowly as I took a breath. I had to pause. I've heard insults before, but there's something about mocking sacrifice that reaches deeper. I looked down at the file again, but I wasn't reading it. I was steadying myself. I said, "Do you know what public humiliation does to someone who already feels forgotten?" He didn't respond. I turned to the veteran. "Sergeant, were you aware he recorded you?" He nodded faintly. "I saw the phone. I walked away." "Why didn't you try to stop him?" He gave a small, tired smile. "I've had worse aimed at me than a phone, Your Honor." That line hit harder than anything else that morning. I removed my glasses and rubbed my eyes. I remembered my friend, Captain Reynolds, sitting in my kitchen years ago. He once told me, "Frank, the hardest part isn't the bullets. It's coming home and feeling invisible." Invisible. I looked at the veteran standing there in that worn jacket. I thought about how easy it is for society to look away. Then I looked at the young man. "You didn't just laugh," I said. "You tried to turn his pain into entertainment." He looked smaller now, not physically, but the confidence that had filled him earlier was gone. He said softly, "I didn't think it would matter." "That," I said quietly, "is the problem." I leaned forward and rested my hands on the bench. "You didn't think it would matter because you've never had to wonder if you matter." The courtroom was silent again. "Let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a position where your worst moment could become someone else's joke? Imagine that. Imagine carrying years of invisible scars only to have them reduced to a caption. Tell me in the comments if you think we've become too casual with each other's dignity." I turned back to the veteran. "Sergeant, after this happened, what did you do?" He cleared his throat. "I left, but later that day someone showed me the video. One of the people in the group chat posted it to a small page. It didn't go viral, but it was enough." I felt my stomach drop slightly. "Enough for what?" I asked gently. He hesitated. "Enough for my granddaughter to see it." The air left the room. I saw Christina lower her eyes. I heard someone in the gallery inhale sharply. I leaned forward slowly. "Your granddaughter?" He nodded. "She's 16. She texted me and asked why people were laughing at me." That sentence carried more weight than any legal argument could. I felt something shift deep inside me. I've got grandchildren. My grandson just turned 12. I think about the world he's growing up in. I think about what he sees online. I think about how fast cruelty spreads now. I looked at the young man. He wasn't looking at the veteran anymore. He was staring at the floor. "Did you know that?" I asked him. His voice was barely audible. "No." I nodded slowly. "You didn't think it would matter." He shook his head almost to himself. I stood up again. I don't do that often, but some moments require it. I said, "Let me tell you something I've learned after 4 decades here. Money can buy comfort. It can buy influence. It can buy silence. But it cannot buy character." I let that sit. I looked at her and said, "Money can buy a lot of things, but it can't buy character, and it definitely can't buy your way above the law." I wasn't quoting for effect. I meant every word. The young man's shoulders were slumped now. His earlier arrogance had dissolved into something else, something closer to realization. I said, "When you filmed him, you had power in your hand, a device that can amplify anything, and you used it to amplify humiliation." He nodded once, slowly. I turned to the veteran. "Sergeant, what did you tell your granddaughter?" He swallowed. "I told her people laugh when they don't understand." I felt my throat tighten. "That's a generous answer," I said. He gave a small shrug. "She doesn't need to carry bitterness." That humility was extraordinary. I thought about something my father used to say. "Frank, the measure of a man isn't how he reacts when he's praised. It's how he reacts when he's tested." This man had been tested more than once. I sat back down and folded my hands. I said to the young man, "I need you to understand something clearly. What you did wasn't just reckless driving. It wasn't just careless speech. It was an act that rippled outward. It reached a granddaughter. It reached a family. It reopened wounds." He nodded again. This time there were tears in his eyes, not dramatic, just there. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I looked at him carefully. "Are you sorry because you're standing in front of me?" I asked. "Or are you sorry because you finally see him?" He didn't answer right away. He turned slightly toward the veteran. For the first time, he really looked at him. "I see him," he said. The veteran met his eyes. The silence between them was heavy, but it wasn't hostile anymore. It was human. I could feel the emotional temperature of the room change again. This wasn't about punishment alone anymore. It was about accountability. But something still lingered in my mind. The unit name, the ambush, Captain Reynolds. I leaned forward once more and asked the veteran, "Sergeant, when you went back into that fire, did you pull out only Captain Reynolds?" He paused. "No, Your Honor," he said. "There was another soldier with him." My pulse quickened slightly. "Do you remember his name?" I asked carefully. He nodded, and when he said that name out loud, I felt the ground shift beneath everything we thought we understood about this case, because the name he spoke was the same last name as the young man standing before me. When he said that last name, I felt the air leave my lungs. It was the same name, not just similar, the same. I looked slowly at the young man standing in front of me. His head snapped up when he heard it too. I saw confusion first, then disbelief. I turned back to the veteran. My voice was steady, but inside everything had shifted. "Say that name again," I asked gently. He repeated it. The courtroom was completely silent now. Even the smallest movement felt loud. I looked at the young man. "That's your grandfather's name, isn't it?" His face had gone pale. "Yes," he whispered. I felt time slow down. I turned to the veteran. "You pulled him out too." He nodded once. He was hit in the leg, couldn't move. My hands pressed firmly against the bench. I needed to ground myself. I looked back at the young man and said slowly and clearly, "The man you laughed at saved your grandfather's life." The words didn't need volume. They carried themselves. I watched his expression crumble in real time. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. His breathing changed, shorter, faster. He looked at the veteran like he was seeing him for the first time. Not as a homeless man, not as a target, but as something else entirely. I didn't know," he said again, but this time it wasn't defensive. It was shaken. The veteran stood there quietly. He wasn't triumphant. He wasn't angry. He just stood. I leaned forward. "You didn't know," I said calmly. "But you didn't care to know either." I paused. Your grandfather lived long enough to build the foundation of your family's success. The wealth you stand on today began with him, and he walked out of that battlefield because this man ran back into it. The young man's eyes filled. He blinked rapidly, trying to steady himself. I felt something deep in my chest. I thought about my own father, about the sacrifices that built the life I've lived, about how easily we forget the cost of comfort. Let me ask you something. Have you ever realized too late that someone you dismissed carried part of your own story? That moment when everything shifts and you see how connected we really are? Think about that. I turned back to the veteran. Sergeant, did you know who his grandfather was at the café? He shook his head. No, Your Honor, I didn't recognize him at first. It's been decades. And when you heard his last name? He looked at the young man. I suspected, but I wasn't sure. I nodded slowly. The young man took a small step forward. His voice was unsteady now. My grandfather. He used to say someone carried him out, he said. He never said who. I felt the weight of that sentence settle over everyone in the room. The veteran gave a small nod. He tried to give me credit. I told him we were just doing our jobs. I could see the tears now in the young man's eyes. Not embarrassment, not fear, something closer to shame. I made a joke, he said quietly, about the man who saved my grandfather. No one spoke for a moment. I let that silence work. After 40 years, I've learned that sometimes the greatest sentence isn't a fine or a punishment. It's the truth. The young man turned fully toward the veteran now. I'm sorry, he said again, but this time his voice broke. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. The veteran looked at him carefully. You didn't ask, he said gently. That wasn't harsh. It was honest. I felt my own eyes sting slightly. I removed my glasses again and set them down. I said, this is why humility matters. This is why respect matters, because you never know whose shoulders you're standing on. The young man nodded, tears falling freely now. I can't undo it, he said, but I want to make it right. I leaned back in my chair. Making it right, I said, starts with understanding. I looked at him directly. You didn't just mock a homeless veteran. You mocked the very sacrifice that gave your family the life you enjoy. His shoulders shook slightly as he tried to control his breathing. The veteran remained calm, dignified. I turned to him. Sergeant, how do you feel right now? He took a breath. I feel tired, Your Honor, but I also feel seen. Seen. That word stayed with me. I looked at the young man again. Do you see him now? He nodded immediately. Yes, I do. I believed him, because the arrogance was gone, completely gone. In its place was something raw and human. But this moment wasn't just about emotion. It was about responsibility. I said, you recorded him, you shared it. That video traveled. His granddaughter saw it. He closed his eyes again briefly. I'll delete it. I'll contact everyone. I'll make sure it's gone. That's a start, I said. But deletion doesn't erase impact. He nodded. I stood once more. In my courtroom, I said firmly, a billionaire's son and a homeless veteran stand on exactly the same ground, and that's how it should be. I let that line settle into the walls. I've learned one thing in 40 years. The law doesn't care about your bank account. It cares about your actions. I looked between them, and today your actions collided with your own family's history. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The young man turned fully toward the veteran again. My grandfather, he used to say he owed his life to someone brave, he said softly. I didn't understand what that meant. The veteran's expression softened slightly. Bravery isn't about medals, he said. It's about doing what's right when it's hard. I felt something settle in that room. Not tension, not anger, clarity. This was bigger than a citation now. It was about legacy. And I knew that what I decided next would shape more than just a legal outcome. It would shape a young man's understanding of who he was. I leaned forward slowly and said, "We're not finished here." Because accountability still mattered. Emotion didn't erase responsibility, and I needed him to understand that fully. I leaned forward slowly and looked at both of them standing in front of me. Emotion filled that room, but I've learned something over 40 years. Emotion can open a heart, but accountability shapes character. I said, "We're not finished here." The young man nodded. He wasn't defensive anymore. He wasn't impatient. He stood there like someone who finally understood the weight of a moment. I turned to him and said, "An apology matters, but action matters more." He swallowed and said quietly, "I understand." I looked at the veteran. "Sergeant, you told me earlier you didn't want his money. You wanted understanding." He nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." I folded my hands together and took a breath. "In that case," I said, "here's what's going to happen." The courtroom leaned in again. "I am ordering you," I said to the young man, "to complete 200 hours of community service at the Providence Veterans Outreach Center. Not as a photo opportunity, not as a headline, but quietly, consistently." He nodded immediately. "Yes, Your Honor." "You will also personally contact every individual you sent that video to. You will explain what you learned today, and you will make sure that video is permanently removed from every device and platform within your reach." "Yes, Your Honor." "And finally," I said, "you will sit down with this man if he is willing, and you will listen, not speak, not defend, listen." The young man turned toward the veteran slowly. I looked at the veteran. "Sergeant, are you willing?" He studied the young man for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "I am," he said. I felt something settle in my chest. "This is not about humiliation," I continued. "It's about growth." Then I said something I rarely say with this much weight behind it. I told her something my father taught me. He said, "Respect isn't something you demand, it's something you earn, and you've earned nothing but contempt here today, but you have the opportunity to earn something better." The young man's eyes filled again. "I will," he said quietly. "I promise." I looked at him carefully. I've heard promises before. Some are empty. This one didn't feel empty. Then something happened I didn't expect. The young man stepped closer to the veteran. He extended his hand, but his hand trembled slightly. "I'm sorry," he said again, "not just because I was wrong, but because I dishonored someone who saved my family." The veteran looked at his hand for a moment. Then he took it, and when they shook hands, the entire courtroom felt different. It wasn't dramatic. There was no applause, just quiet understanding. I picked up my gavel, but didn't strike it immediately. Instead, I said one more thing. Money can build buildings, but only character builds men. Then I brought the gavel down, gently. Case continued for review after completion of service. That day didn't end when the courtroom cleared. Later that afternoon, I was in my chambers when Christina knocked softly. She said, "Judge, someone would like to speak with you." It was the veteran. He stepped inside slowly. He held his cap in his hands again. I stood up immediately. "Sergeant," I said, "please sit." He shook his head. "I won't take much of your time, Your Honor." I smiled faintly. "You already have." He gave a small chuckle. "I just wanted to thank you," he said. "Not for the ruling, for seeing me." That word again, seen. I felt my throat tighten. "I should be thanking you," I said. "You carried more than most of us ever will." He looked down at his cap. "I didn't want his money," he said again. "I just didn't want my granddaughter thinking that's how the world works." I nodded slowly. "She won't," I said. "Not after today." He smiled faintly and left. 2 months passed. Cases came and went. Life moved forward the way it always does. Then one afternoon, Christina brought a letter into my chambers. "It's for you," she said. The envelope was simple, handwritten. It was from the young man. I almost didn't open it, but something told me to. Inside, he wrote about his hours at the Veterans Center. He wrote about listening to stories he had never imagined. He wrote about sitting with men who woke up in the middle of the night from dreams that never left them. He wrote one line that stayed with me. I used to think strength was success. Now I know strength is sacrifice. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment. A week later, I received another update. The young man had quietly funded a housing initiative for homeless veterans in his grandfather's name. No press release, no ceremony, just action. And 3 days after that, the veteran returned to my courtroom, not for a case, just to visit. He stood in my doorway again, but this time his posture was lighter. "Your Honor," he said, "he's been showing up every week." I smiled. "He listens more than he talks," the veteran added. "That's new for him." We both laughed softly. Then he said something that brought tears to my eyes. "My granddaughter told me she's proud of me again." I had to pause. After 40 years on this bench, I've seen a lot of verdicts, some loud, some quiet, but the best ones don't just resolve a case. They restore something. I think about that day often, about how easily judgment can blind us, about how quickly arrogance can crumble when faced with truth. My father came to this country with nothing but hope and respect for hard work. He taught me that dignity isn't measured by wealth. It's measured by how you treat the person who can offer you nothing in return. After 40 years, I still believe the law is the great equalizer. In my courtroom, a billionaire's son and a homeless veteran stand on exactly the same ground. Money can't buy integrity. It can't buy humility. And it certainly can't buy respect. So let me ask you this. Do you think I was too harsh on him? Or not harsh enough? I'm genuinely curious what you think. And here's another question for you. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have shown mercy or delivered justice? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I actually read them, every single one. If this story meant something to you, if you believe in equal justice like I do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Turn on that bell icon so you never miss another story from my courtroom. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message, someone who believes that character matters more than cash. And check out the next video on your screen. I've got another incredible story from my courtroom that you won't believe. I'll see you tomorrow with another lesson about justice, respect, and what really matters in this life. I'm Frank Caprio. I've been on this bench for 40 years because I believe something simple. We're all equal before the law, every single one of us, rich or poor, powerful or powerless. That's what makes this country work. Thank you for listening to my story. God bless you. And remember, respect costs nothing, but it's worth everything.